Hello, this is a series of philosophical talks called The Intellect of Survival. I'm Michael, the host of this channel. How does intellect work? Why did it arise? And where does it lead us? These are the questions we pursue here. In this part of the series, we look at what philosophy has discovered about how intellect works. Today's lecture is the second part of the discussion on Plato's dialogue Parmenides. Let us sum up the examination begun in the first lecture. On the one hand, Plato connects the concepts of the one, the many, and the part in an intuitively understandable way. The assumption that the one is sounds natural. The one, of course, is not the many. The part is undoubtedly associated with the many rather than with the one. On the other hand, Plato disregards elementary rules accepted in reasoning. He allows for options that violate the boundaries of the accepted assumptions. He employs a hidden assumption without presenting it to his interlocutors. He provides no grounds for a statement, yet uses it as if it were self-evident, which does not correspond to reality. He poses an incorrect question, which prevents him from giving a correct answer. He connects concepts without noticing that the implications of these connections contradict the connections themselves. And all this happens at the very beginning of the dialogue. At the same time, anyone examining this dialogue can see that throughout the entire text, Plato uses the same method of analyzing the connection of concepts that is demonstrated at the beginning. Why does Plato use concepts in such a strange manner? A part participates in the many. Is it within the many? But it itself is something one. How does it come to be in the many? The one in the many. What does it mean that a part makes the one many? How does it do this? How can it do anything? How can the many change? How can the one disappear? Are we speaking here about concepts, names, thoughts, things, representations, meanings? Plato's one, what does it speak of? To what does it point? What is its meaning? Does it have any content? Concepts are not treated the way Plato treats the one, the many, and the part. Concepts are abstractions whose content is limited by a definition. A concept will not become another, will not cease to exist, will not acquire properties, will not become a property of another, will not do something to another concept, etc. All these metamorphoses have no relation to concepts. So, are the one, the many, and the part concepts? Yes, these are concepts whose content consists of abstractions. The one has as its content the property of being one. Correspondingly, the many being many and the part being a part. They differ from concepts having things as their content. If the concept of stone includes all stones, then the concept of the large includes everything large. What does everything large mean? It is everything that we, when comparing by magnitude, determine as possessing the property of being large. That is, a certain abstract action, comparison by magnitude, creates the concept of the large, which includes in its content all results of such a comparison that are called large. The concept of the large includes all abstractions of large. The case is the same with the concepts of the one, the many, and the part, and also with all other concepts of Plato. At the same time, the names of these concepts do not correspond to their purpose. Since their content is abstractions, their names should not refer to the concrete. But in Plato, they point not only to properties, but also to the bearers of these properties. The one points both to the property of being one and to the fact that this property has a bearer. The same applies to the many, the part, the whole, etc. Let us take, for example, the concept of oneness. Let us imagine it as a box. On the lid of the box is written the name of the concept, oneness. On the front side is written its definition. Oneness is the property of a thing to be in accordance with its purpose, one. On the side wall is written everything that corresponds to the definition put here, and an arrow pointing upwards. And inside the box lies a pile of slips of paper, on each of which is written oneness. Now let us take this concept with the Platonic name the One. We see that the concept with this name has the property of oneness, but only the abstraction oneness can get into the box, not one. After all, the content of concepts responsible for abstractions are abstractions, with the same name possessed by the concept containing them and the property governed by this concept. One, however, unlike oneness, possesses the property of oneness and is not this property. It cannot be the property while being its bearer. Let us see if there is a connection between the names of concepts in Plato and the way he manages these concepts. Can the one be the many or not? It cannot, says Plato. And this is indeed so, since each concept has its own box, and the one cannot get into the box of another. It can, says Plato. And so it is, since a certain one, of course, having parts within itself, can also be a certain many. At the same time, there is no doubt that, having different boxes, the concept of oneness cannot be the concept of manyness. Can the part turn the one into the many? It can, says Parmenides, and this is correct, since a certain one, having divided into parts, will turn into a certain many. But this contradicts the nature of concepts, each of which exists only within the framework of its definition. Therefore, the concept of partness cannot turn the concept of oneness into the concept of manyness. Yes, there is a connection between how Plato names concepts and how he uses them. Words with Platonic names are centaur words. They allude both to the property and to the bearer of the property, both to the concept and to the thing. This allows Plato to use them in a dual way. But he does so not because it serves to justify his method or system of concepts, but because the very existence of centaur words forces him to do so. The problem that Plato attempts to solve in this dialogue, or to show the impossibility of solving, is the connection of concepts. And it is indeed not simple. On the one hand, a stone is a stone. On the other, a stone is not the concept stone, i.e., a stone is not stone. A stone has the property of hardness. But hardness is also a concept and not a property. A property, on the one hand, relates to the stone, on the other is a concept, on the third relates to all things, on the fourth relates to all concepts. Concepts exist in thoughts, whereas properties exist in things. But the properties of concepts exist in thoughts. There is no such property that could not be attributed to some concept. Therefore, we treat concepts as things. Plato examines concepts relating to things, properties, and thoughts, as well as properties belonging to things and relating to concepts, and also thoughts that are concepts and behave like things. Ultimately, he attempts to organize this kaleidoscope of the thinkable around two states: the impossibility for a concept to be itself in the presence of relations with another, and the impossibility for a concept to be itself without relations with another. In the first state, it is obvious to him that one concept cannot be another. Accordingly, Properties cannot participate in both concepts because this participation would cause a participation of the concepts in each other, which would make one concept the other. Therefore, properties participate only in one concept playing the role of a thing, while the other without properties plays the role of a concept. In the second state, it is obvious that one concept cannot be defined without relations with other concepts, including itself. These relations make it participate in properties which define it. In both states, Plato does not burden himself with a strict distinction between concept, property, and thing, and therefore easily transitions from one concept to another. He is aided in this by the use of centaur words, which allow seeing together what exists separately. For example, the word smooth speaks of a property and of something of which it is a property. But there is a problem that a centaur word cannot solve. Smooth cannot establish a connection between the concept of smoothness and another concept. To solve this problem, Plato uses the following mechanism. A part, I think, is a part of a whole. Yes, of course, a part can be a part of a whole, but it can be a part of anything, not necessarily of a whole. If, however, we are speaking not about a whole, but about the concept of the whole, then yes, it implies the presence of parts, but their presence is in the whole, and not in the whole. That is, this does not mean that only by being a whole, something has parts. But Plato insists that a part is specifically a part of a whole. He defines part through whole. But if we are talking about a definition, then we are reasoning at the level of concepts. This means he is speaking about the concepts of part and whole, declaring their connection. But when he needs to show this connection, he shows it through the connection between a whole and a part. He says this is a part of a whole, not of the whole. The reason for this is that, according to Plato, concepts have a certain affinity called participation. If concepts in the form of properties meet in a thing, then not only does the thing participate in a certain concept, but the concepts also turn out to participate in some way in each other. Therefore, if Plato sees that in a whole as a thing there are parts, then the whole is connected to the part by virtue of their participation in each other through the whole. Let us show this mechanism with another example. If we say smooth surface, this does not mean that the concept of smoothness participates in the concept of surface. This can only mean that some surface is smooth. But, according to Plato, the mental contact of the concept of surface and the concept of smoothness relative to a certain smooth surface creates a participation of the concept of surface in the concept of smoothness. One might object that the connection of concepts in this case occurs not through some smooth surface, but in thoughts, and has no relation to the thing. But then we return to the same problem. How do concepts having different definitions and different contents connect with each other? Plato's answer, through participation in each other, which follows from the participation of the thing in these concepts. Plato sees things as separate from each other and does not attempt to connect them by mystical participation. But properties exist in thoughts. Yes, these are properties of things, but as thoughts, they all participate in each other, and it is not difficult at all to transition from one to another, which he demonstrates throughout the entire dialogue. Plato's world of things is already free from mysticism, but thinking is still shrouded in it. His concepts are not yet separated from things and retain a mystical connection with them through their properties. Nevertheless, he managed to demonstrate the power concepts hold as an instrument of the intellect. He did not succeed in explaining how they create meaning by working together. Thus, he did not even proceed to examine the structure of the intellect. However, he did not set himself such a task. Here is what Hegel thought of the dialogue Parmenides. And Plato's Parmenides, arguably the greatest masterpiece of ancient dialectic. Friends, write your questions and objections in the comments. I will reply and join the discussion.